to our video. Today we're making gnomes. Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. I'm Anne from the Sussex Handmade Soap Company. I'm going to be quick because the video is about to run out of power. We're making Christmas gnomes today. Again, it's last year's recipe that you're going to see us making. The final soap is very slightly different, but it's pretty much the same technique. Hope you enjoy the video. So first off today, I'm actually going to show you the moulds that we are using to create our gnomes. These are actually moulds that Wayne made for me. I basically gave him a picture of a little gnome that I wanted to create, and he then made the gnomes out of clay, and then he made me these silicone moulds. So these are going to be hats. These are going to be beards, and we are going to have a little nose in the middle that we're going to create with some separate soap batter. So I'm going to show you now how we create the hats and the beards. So here I have got my lye and my water, and I'm going to begin today just by adding the lye into the water, and then I'm going to be stirring it to dissolve it. And then once the lye is fairly nicely incorporated, I'm going to add in 7.5 grams of Dead Sea clay powder, and that is what we are using to actually colour our beards today. And I'm then just going to carry on mixing that into the lye water. I'm now going to move the lye over to my sink where I've got an open window to increase the ventilation because the fumes coming off this are fairly strong. So my lye water has now cooled down to around about 118, 119 degrees. My oils are at 115 degrees. So I'm going to add my lye water into the oils, and then we're just going to bring it to quite a light trace today because we want it to be nice and pourable. I've just realised I haven't got my goggles on. That was a faux pas. Let me pop them on now.
Faux pas.
Faux pas, yeah, I took them off and now I've popped. Right, so goggles back on now, and I'm just going to, as I said, bring this to a light trace. And now, purely to make pouring into those moulds easier, and for no other reason, I'm decanting into a smaller jug, just because it's got that spout that's going to make it a lot easier getting the batter into what is quite a small mould. So now all I'm going to do is just fill up each of these little beard cavities with our grey coloured Dead Sea clay beards. And I did think about just using a kind of grey coloured mica for the beards, but what I really like with the Dead Sea clay is you have got those kind of flecks of clay running through the soap batter, and when the actual finished beards are done, it just gives them a little bit of added extra interest and really kind of, I don't know, it almost makes them look old. So you've got the wise old gnomes with their little flecks of grey in their grey beards. So that is why we went for Dead Sea clay as the colourant rather than an actual grey mica. And actually this whole soap, bar the nose and the fragrance oil, is all natural ingredients. So you could easily substitute the colour that we've chosen to use in the nose for a pink clay, and then you could substitute the scent for an essential oil, and then you would actually have a completely natural soap. So if that's your thing and you like the natural scents and the natural colours, that is a substitution that you could make to make this Christmassy soap a natural one. Perfect, so that is our beards done. Now we're going to move on and do the hats. So for the hats, it's much the same process as with the beards. We are pouring our lye down into our water and then combining it well with the spoon, stirring it to dissolve. So I'm now going to add in 7.5 grams of red clay and 2.5 grams of Fiery Fusion mica from Resonate. Again, if you wanted to keep this a natural soap, just omit the mica, and that probably won't make a huge colour difference. And this is the only time I've ever added mica to lye water. I wouldn't normally do it, and the only reason I did it on this occasion is because when I was practicing this soap, I had a daft moment and I measured my clay, and then I put my mica in the same pot, and then I tipped it into the lye, and then I thought I shouldn't have done that, but it sort of worked. And I don't really know if the mica actually makes much of a difference to the colour of the hats, but I'm putting it in there anyway, and it seems to work, and I get a red that I'm happy with. So after 24 hours, the hats and beards have firmed up, and all we need to do then is just release them from the mould. And this is a little bit tricky, but it generally works okay. So I just press gently from underneath after having loosened off the edges of the mould as best as I can. And the beards kind of just pop up, and then I very carefully just ease them out of the mould. And there we have one beard. And just to show you with the hats are harder to get out. They are that bit smaller, so it is a little more tricky to get the hats out. But it is the same principle, just kind of gently easing the edge of the mould away from the embed, gently pressing it from underneath, and then as soon as I get a chance, just pulling it out from the top. I don't like to press too firmly underneath if I can avoid it, because it can leave slight finger marks when these embeds are still soft. So I prefer the pulling it out rather than pushing it out technique. There we go, one hat. And then once they are all out, I shall just show you quickly what we do. We have a hat, we have a beard, and I then use some distilled water and a paintbrush, and I paint a small amount of water down the edge of the beard on both sides. And then I take the hat and I just sort of line them up and press them together, and that should over time stick them to each other so that we've got a nice kind of whole gnome. So now we have joined our little gnomes together, the beards and the hats have been joined, so we need to get the nose batter ready. I have put 1 gram of pink lemonade mica by Resonate into some batter that I brought to a medium trace, and we are just going to work it in with the spatula. It's a little bit tough doing the nose batter, as I'm calling it, purely because if it's too thin, it runs out through the bottom, because these are not completely sealed down at the bottom. And if it's too thick, then it is just a big pain to actually get it nicely into the nose section. I am actually going to swap my jug over as well, because I normally do it in a jug with a slightly finer spout. I don't know why I poured it into this jug today. So I've transferred it into a jug with a finer spout now, and now I'm going to try and fill up these little nose holes. I've got a feeling this might be a little on the thin side. Yeah, it is starting to escape out the bottom, so I'm going to put it to one side and just allow it to thicken just a little so that we don't get it seeping out the bottom that you can see is happening just there. So we need to wait for it to thicken up just slightly. Right, so I have waited a little bit and done a few more testers up the top to check the consistency, and I think we are now at a kind of level we can work with. So I'm just going to go back and just slowly fill each nose up, and there will be some excess that kind of comes out the top a little. That is normal, but I'm just going to slowly work my way down each and every nose, filling them up. And any excess can just be scraped off after they have set up. So once I've poured all the noses, I do just take a kind of cocktail stick and I just poke down through them just to check there is no air bubbles, and in this one there clearly is, because we have got quite a lot of space now that can be refilled. I just work my way through all of them, because if there's air bubbles, then when the soap is cut, you're going to have a gonk or a tomty or a gnome or whatever you want to call them with a big hole in its nose, which we don't want. And again, I'm just going to work my way down them all, and any that do have air bubbles that come up, I'm just going to top up with the batter so that they've all got nice filled noses. So now I have topped up the noses, I'm going to use just a little paintbrush just to kind of neaten them up a little. And to be honest, I probably don't really need to do this, because once the soap has dried, it's fairly easy to actually peel off the excess, because I have done that before, especially with the underside where some of it has spilt out. I find that once the soap has kind of dried up, it peels off pretty easily, but I prefer doing it this way because then it's done. So just giving it a very rough kind of neaten up with a paintbrush, and you can already see the difference that it makes between like this one and this one here. It just helps them to look more like what they're actually meant to look like, because I think with this design, if it ends up being messy, it's not going to be immediately obvious as to what these are meant to be. So I want it to be really kind of precise and detailed. I'm going to work my way along with my paintbrush now and finish off neatening up the gnomes. So I have now cleaned up all of the gnomes. Hopefully they are looking a little more gnome-like now. Now we just need to wait sort of 24 hours until the central nose soap has firmed up, and then we can go on to actually making the gnome soap. So after another 24 hours, we have our gnomes all firmed up. And as I mentioned, we do find that on the underneath, we sometimes get a little excess, but it is really easy just to use fingers to scrape off that little bit of excess. And this doesn't really matter if it's not perfect, because this is actually going to be the back of the design anyway. The front of the design is going to be what's here in the middle. So these are only going to be the backs of the soaps, which obviously I want to make them look pretty, but if they're not 100% perfect, it doesn't matter. So there we go, worked off the excess, and there is the gnome, and as you can see, I think he looks pretty gnome-like. So now we can finally start to make the actual soap. So because this is going to be a fairly simple soap to actually put together, I am going to show the soap being made this time. I haven't done in our other Christmas videos, but for this one I will. We are going in with our lye water now. We are around about 118 degrees Fahrenheit. And now all I'm going to do is bring it to quite a light trace with the stick blender. And that is basically all we need to do for this soap, other than adding in some fragrance. So now I've brought the soap to quite a nice sort of a light trace, we're going to add in our fragrance oil. Today we are going with 60 grams of candy cane by Candle Shack. This is a really nice kind of minty scent, very reminiscent I suppose of those candy cane mints that you do get around Christmas time. But yeah, the overriding scent is just a very nice, pleasant mint scent. Nothing too harsh, nothing too strong, just a nice minty smell. And I'm going to decant this into another jug before I pour. The only reason is it's going to make pouring a heck of a lot easier than trying to pour it out of this big pan. Now I'm just going to pull our mould back in, and then I'm going to carefully pour the soap down into the mould. I'm doing my best to avoid getting the tops of those gnomes. If any of them do get a little splash, it's not the end of the world. It'd just be nice to keep them looking all kind of fresh and clean. And this is why I wanted the batter to stay fairly thin, because if this was thick, you kind of imagine what a pain it would be trying to get it into the mould. To be honest, this really is as thick as I would want to go with this batter. So I have filled the mould now, and I'm just going to give it a shake to kind of level that batter. And a tap down. And as you can see, a couple of the gnomes have got some batter that has run onto them, but that's not really a major problem because this is actually going to be the reverse of the soap. What is going to be the front of the soap is what we're going to cut through in the middle tomorrow. So these are going to be the backs, so if they're not 100% perfect, I am not too worried about that. The main thing is, all bar one of our gnomes did actually stay in place and didn't move while we were filling the mould. This little guy here got a bit of a wobble on, but I have squeezed him back down into position. So that is Christmas Gnome soap scented with candy cane, all completed. I'm going to pop the lid of our mould onto it now, just by turning it round and sliding it on. And then we're going to leave that until tomorrow, and then we shall turn it out and chop it up. I am going to clean off these little bits of soap batter where I had some spillages though. But we'll see you tomorrow for the cut. So we have now unmoulded our Christmas Gnome soap. We've turned it upside down and we've actually marked out where we want to cut the individual bars. And this one needs to be cut a little bit differently to our normal soaps. We can't just chuck it onto the soap cutter because that wouldn't work. And unfortunately, we haven't got one of those kind of single wire cutters that can nicely split this into loaves for us. So we will be doing it all by hand with a knife. I can't cut straight for, anything. So Wayne is going to chop this up into the individual kind of chunks of soap for me, and then we are going to cut it down again further into bars. So Wayne's going to come in now and cut this off camera for me, then we will be back when it is individual chunks.
Whoopee!
So Wayne has now chopped the bars down into nice, easy to manage chunks for me, and I'm just going to use the soap cutter to cut them down further into 2 individual bars. So I'm placing it onto the soap cutter, trying to keep it as straight as possible, and then just making sure that my wire is going to go down through the centre of the bar, and then carefully chopping the chunk of soap in half, and then we should have our gnomes on the inside. And there we have it. As we hoped, the one chunk of soap has cut in half nicely to give us 2 gnome soaps. So that's the back, which is a little rough and ready, but then we have the front, which has turned out really nicely. So there we go, Christmas gnome soaps. So here is the final finished 2022 gnome, very slightly different to 2021's. You can see I have peaked the top and we use a slightly different technique to make it, but it's turned out pretty much the same. This is the last one we've got, the rest have sold out. I'm really happy with how he's turned out. If you like our videos, give us a like, give us a subscribe. That was our final Christmas special, so we will see you in 2023. Have a fantastic Christmas and New Year. Bye!